Muslim girl bullied at school, then a famous actor shows up to protect her. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Amina walked through the hallways of Westview High, keeping her head down, clutching her books to her chest. The familiar weight of stairs bore down on her as she passed by groups of students who whispered, sneered, or simply ignored her altogether. She had been through this every day for the past 3 years. The stares, the murmurs, the comments she was never meant to hear but always did. Why does she even wear that scarf? Does she think she's better than us? What's with the birthmark? She looks like a freak. Amina had long since learned that silence was her only shield. She never reacted. She never fought back. She just kept moving. But today would be different. As she reached her locker, she heard the unmistakable voice of Brittany Spencer, the school's most popular girl, dripping with cruelty. "Hey, scarf girl." Amina froze. The hallway fell silent. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her chest. Brittany stood with her usual posse of cheerleaders and rich kids, a smirk curling her lips. Amina said nothing. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Brittany, unfazed by the lack of reaction, tilted her head. "Are you ignoring me?" Amina reached for her locker, trying to focus. "Guys," Brittany said dramatically, turning to her friends. "She's ignoring me. How rude." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Amina's hands shook as she tried to unlock her combination. Brittany stepped closer. "So, tell me something. Why do you even bother coming to school when no one wants you here?" Amina's fingers stilled on the lock. Laughter erupted. The walls felt like they were closing in. Brittany wasn't done. She leaned in, voice dripping with mockery. "And that birthmark? That's gotta be the reason your parents cover you up, right?" Amina's breath caught in her throat. A sharp, horrified gasp spread through the hallway. Even some of Brittany's own friends looked uneasy now. But Brittany? She was thriving off of it. She grinned, crossing her arms. "I mean, come on. Let's be real, guys." She turned to her audience as if this were some kind of show. "Nobody wants to see that." Amina couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. She barely registered the roaring laughter that followed. Tears burned her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. She did the only thing she could. She ran. Shoving past Brittany's posse, past the crowds, past the cruel laughter ringing in her ears. She didn't stop running until she reached the girls' bathroom. Locking herself in a stall, she pressed her hands to her face and let the tears come silently. She hated this school. She hated herself. She wanted to disappear. For the first time in her life, she truly believed she would never belong. And that was the worst feeling in the world. But what Amina didn't know was that her entire life was about to change. Because tomorrow morning, when she walked through the school doors, a famous actor would be waiting for her. And he was about to teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. The next morning, Amina dreaded going to school. She had barely slept, replaying Brittany's words over and over in her head, each one slicing deeper than the last. "Nobody wants you here. Nobody wants to see that." She had tried to hide the puffy redness of her eyes with extra cold water, but the pain remained under her skin, deep and unshakable. As she walked toward the school entrance, she kept her head down, bracing herself for another day of whispers, stares, and humiliation. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, she noticed something was different. The usual murmur of early morning chatter had turned into an excited buzz. Students were whispering, pointing, nudging each other. Amina didn't think much of it. Maybe another viral trend had taken over, and for once she wouldn't be the subject of attention. But then she saw him. Standing near the lockers, arms crossed, was a man she had only ever seen on TV. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence, Malik Carter, a famous actor, a celebrity activist, and he was looking right at her. Amina froze mid-step. She must have been hallucinating. Why would Malik Carter, a Hollywood star known for speaking out about injustice and representation, be here at Westview High? And why was he staring at her? The hallway went dead silent as students began realizing what was happening. Brittany and her posse stood near the lockers, their faces twisted in pure confusion. Malik took a slow step forward, his gaze steady, unreadable. Then, in front of everyone, he spoke. "Amina." Hearing her name from his lips nearly made her collapse on the spot. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Malik gave a small smile, his tone gentle but firm. "Can we talk?" Amina's heart slammed against her ribs. She felt every single pair of eyes on her. The entire hallway was holding its breath. Brittany's expression shifted from confusion to something else, something uneasy. Amina swallowed hard. Her legs felt like concrete, but somehow she managed to nod. Malik motioned toward a quiet corner of the hallway, and Amina forced herself to follow. She could still hear the whispers, the stunned murmurs from her classmates, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of them. Malik waited until they were a few steps away before speaking again. "I heard what happened yesterday," he said, his voice low and serious. Amina's stomach dropped. You did?" Malik nodded. "Sammy told me." "Her brother." Amina's breath hitched. "Of course, Sammy." He had always been passionate about fighting for justice, always the first to step in when he saw unfairness. He must have reached out to Malik, his old friend, his former mentor, asking for help. And Malik had come. For her. Amina swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it." Malik tilted his head. "Why not?" Amina hesitated. "Because, this is just how it is." A shadow passed over Malik's face. "That doesn't make it right." Amina looked down, suddenly ashamed. She didn't want to be some charity case, someone who needed rescuing. But then Malik did something unexpected. He sat down on the bench beside them, leveling himself to her height. "I want to tell you something," he said. Amina hesitated, then slowly sat beside him. "I grew up in a town like this," Malik continued. "I wasn't always famous. I wasn't always respected. And when I was your age, people made me feel like I didn't belong either." Amina blinked. "You?" He nodded. "I know what it's like to walk into a room and feel like everyone wishes you weren't there. I know what it's like to have people judge you before you even open your mouth." Amina felt a lump in her throat. She had never heard someone say it like that. Malik exhaled, his voice softer now. "And I know what it's like to believe them." Amina looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap. That was exactly what had been happening to her. She had started to believe Brittany. Started to believe the cruel voices. Malik continued, "But here's the thing, Amina, you are not small. You are not invisible. And you do not deserve to feel like you're less than anyone else in this school." Tears stung Amina's eyes. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep them from falling. Malik smiled slightly. "That's why I'm here. To make sure they know that too." Amina's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Malik stood, extending a hand. "Come with me." Amina hesitated but slowly took his hand, letting him lead her back toward the center of the hallway. The moment they stepped forward, every student turned to face them. Malik let go of Amina's hand and crossed his arms, his presence commanding attention. Then, in a voice loud enough for the entire hallway to hear, he said, "I heard what happened yesterday." A ripple of uneasy movement went through the crowd. Brittany's posture stiffened. Malik's eyes swept over the students. "I heard how someone in this school thought it was okay to humiliate and degrade a classmate just because she's different." Silence. You could hear a pin drop. Malik's voice hardened. "Let me make something very clear. Amina doesn't need your approval to exist. She doesn't need your permission to take up space in this school. And she sure as hell doesn't need to hide who she is because of your ignorance." Brittany's face had gone pale. Some of the students exchanged nervous glances. Malik shook his head. "I travel all over the world. I meet powerful people, celebrities, politicians. But let me tell you something, real strength isn't about fame or money. Real strength is standing up for someone when no one else does." The words hung heavy in the air. Malik turned to Amina. "And you?" His voice softened. "You're stronger than you know." Amina's throat tightened. She had never felt this seen, this protected. The weight of isolation that had crushed her for so long felt lighter. Then Malik did something that would change everything. He pulled out his phone, held it up, and started recording. "I want the world to know what's happening here," he said, turning the camera toward the students. "I want them to see what Amina faces every day. And I want them to see that it's going to stop. Today." Gasps spread through the crowd. Students whispered, realization dawning. This was going viral. The world was about to know. Brittany's face twisted in panic. She opened her mouth to protest, but Malik wasn't done yet. He turned the camera back to himself. "If you've ever been bullied, if you've ever felt small, I want you to know this. You are not alone. You are enough. And no one gets to decide otherwise." The hallway was completely still. Then a single clap. Then another. And another. Until the entire hallway erupted in applause. For Amina. For Malik's message. For change. And in that moment, Amina knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of applause filled the hallway, something Amina had never expected to hear, for her. She stood there, frozen as students clapped, some of them even nodding at her with something resembling respect. The same people who had ignored her, who had whispered behind her back, were now applauding her existence. Malik lowered his phone, slipping it into his pocket, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the crowd. Brittany's panic was visible now. She was shifting from foot to foot, her usual smugness replaced with something that almost looked like fear. She had never been challenged like this before. What the hell is this? Brittany finally snapped, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. You're seriously making a scene over a joke? The hallway went silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of disbelief. Malik let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. A joke? His voice carried an unmistakable edge. Brittany crossed her arms. Yeah. Everyone knows Amina's just sensitive. We mess around all the time. She never even says anything, so how is that our fault? Amina's stomach twisted. That was it, wasn't it? That was how bullies always got away with it. If you didn't fight back, it wasn't real. If you didn't scream or cry in front of them, it didn't count. Malik took a slow step forward, his presence commanding. You know, I've met a lot of people in my career. Some of the most powerful people in the world. You know what the difference is between power and weakness? Brittany frowned, saying nothing. Malik continued, his voice deadly calm. Power is when you stand up for someone who can't. Weakness is tearing people down to make yourself feel important. A few students murmured in agreement. Brittany's face flushed. Malik tilted his head slightly. So, tell me, Brittany, do you feel important right now? A muscle in Brittany's jaw twitched. She looked around, realizing that, for the first time, no one was laughing with her. Even her friends had inched away, their faces uneasy. Amina could see it happening in real time. The power Brittany once had over the school was crumbling. And then, one of Brittany's own friends, a girl named Kayla, took a deep breath and said, I think you should apologize. Brittany's head snapped toward her friend. Excuse me? Kayla looked uncomfortable, but she didn't back down. You heard me? Another student, someone from the soccer team, nodded. Yeah, Brittany. This wasn't cool. Brittany looked around wildly as if waiting for someone to jump in and defend her. But no one did. For the first time she was alone. Amina had dreamed of this moment before, imagined 100 different ways she would make Brittany regret every cruel word. But now that it was happening, she didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired. Malik must have sensed it because he looked at her, his voice softer now. Amina, what do you want to say? Amina swallowed hard, stepping forward. She met Brittany's eyes, the same eyes that had tormented her for years. And then, in the calmest voice she could manage, she said, I just want you to leave me alone. Brittany blinked, caught off guard. That was it? No anger. No screaming. Just that? But that was all Amina had ever wanted, to exist without fear, without shame. Malik nodded. Then I think we're done here. The crowd slowly began to disperse, the excitement fading into murmured conversations. Brittany stood frozen, her pride still battling her humiliation, but she didn't say another word. She just turned and walked away. And for the first time, Amina watched her retreat instead of feeling the need to disappear herself. Jordan came up beside her, grinning. Well, that was something. Amina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Yeah. Malik smiled at her, eyes warm. You okay? She nodded, even though she wasn't sure if she meant it yet. I think so. Malik chuckled. Good. Because this is just the beginning? Amina frowned. What do you mean? Malik pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. Her heart stopped. Because the video he had taken? It had already gone viral. Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. People from all over the world defending her, supporting her, lifting her up in a way she had never experienced before. Amina stared in shock. What is this? Malik's smile widened. This is your story. And now, the world is listening. For the first time in her life, Amina didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And it was the most powerful feeling in the world. Amina scrolled through the video comments, her hands trembling. This is heartbreaking, but I'm so glad she's finally getting the support she deserves. No one should have to go through this. Stay strong, Amina. That girl is braver than any of those bullies. Respect to Malik for stepping in. Thousands of messages poured in, words of encouragement, stories from other people who had been bullied, and even students from different schools calling for change. Amina had spent years feeling like she didn't matter, like her pain was something she had to endure alone. But now the entire world knew her name. And not in the way Brittany had intended. Malik watched her carefully. I know it's a lot to take in. Amina nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I never thought people would care. Malik's expression softened. People care more than you think. Sometimes they just need a reason to speak up. Amina exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. She wasn't used to this feeling, to being supported instead of torn down. Jordan nudged her. So what now, superstar? Amina let out a small laugh, shaking her head. I have no idea. Malik smiled. I do. She looked at him, confused. I want you to come with me to an event next week. A panel on bullying and discrimination. A place where people like you, people who've been silenced, get to share their stories. Amina's stomach flipped. Me? Speak? Malik nodded. You don't have to. But if you're ready, I think you have something powerful to say. Amina's mind raced. She had spent so much time hiding, trying to avoid attention. And now she was being asked to stand on a stage and talk about her pain in front of strangers? But then she thought about the hundreds of people in the comments, about the messages from kids who had gone through exactly what she had. Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe this was bigger. She took a deep breath. I'll do it. Malik's smile was one of pride. I knew you would. Amina had no idea how this journey would unfold. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to step into it. The week leading up to the event was a whirlwind. Amina had never spoken in front of an audience before, let alone about something as personal as her own pain. Every time she thought about standing on stage, her stomach twisted into tight knots. But whenever doubt crept in, she thought about the thousands of messages she had received. People from around the world had shared their stories. Kids who had been bullied, adults who still carried their childhood scars, even teachers who regretted not stepping in sooner. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had a voice, and she had to use it. The night before the event, Malik called her. You ready for this? His deep voice rumbled through the phone. Amina let out a nervous laugh. I don't know. Malik chuckled. That's okay. Nobody is ever really ready for something big. You just do it anyway. Amina hesitated. What if I mess up? You won't, Malik said simply. Because this isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. She let those words sink in. Real. She could do that. The next day, Amina stood backstage, gripping the microphone tightly in her sweaty hands. Her name was about to be called. Her heart raced. She took a deep breath, repeating Malik's words in her head. Just be real. Then the announcer spoke. Please welcome a young woman whose story has inspired millions. Amina Hassan. The crowd erupted in applause. Amina stepped onto the stage, blinking against the bright lights. She could see Malik in the front row, nodding at her in encouragement. She swallowed hard, brought the mic to her lips, and spoke. My name is Amina, she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. And for years I believed I was invisible. The room fell into silence. Every eye was on her. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was owning her story. And as she continued, she realized this was what true power felt like. Amina took another deep breath, scanning the faces in the crowd. She saw curiosity, sympathy, and most importantly, understanding. She wasn't alone. She wasn't invisible. And she was about to prove it. When I was younger, I used to think that if I just stayed quiet, if I just ignored the stares and the whispers, it would all stop. She paused, gripping the microphone tighter. But I was wrong. The room was completely still. I thought if I made myself small, they'd leave me alone. She shook her head, her voice steady now. But bullies don't stop just because you don't react. They don't stop just because you wish them away. Malik nodded from the front row, his expression one of pure encouragement. Amina exhaled, her voice gaining strength. They stop when you make them see you. Murmurs spread through the audience, a ripple of agreement. She continued. I used to hate my reflection. I used to wonder why I had to look like this, why I had to wear this scarf, why I had to be different. Her voice faltered slightly, but she pushed forward. And then I realized, I wasn't the problem. Their ignorance was. A few people clapped, soft at first but growing louder. Amina swallowed the lump in her throat. What happened to me wasn't okay. But I'm not here to ask for pity. I'm here to say that I survived it. More applause. And I'm still standing. The room erupted. Tears burned her eyes as she smiled, taking in the moment, the validation, the sheer weight of being heard. She had spent years believing her voice didn't matter. But now she knew better. As the applause faded, she lifted the mic one last time. To anyone who's ever been bullied, who's ever felt like they weren't enough, her voice was soft but filled with power. You're seen. You are strong. And you are so much more than the lies they tell you. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, standing for her. Amina let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed but empowered in a way she never thought possible. As she stepped off the stage, Malik was there, grinning. Told you? Amina laughed through her tears. Yeah, you did. And in that moment she knew. She would never be silent again. Amina sat backstage, her heart still pounding from the overwhelming wave of applause. She had never felt anything like this before, this raw, unshakable sense of validation. For years she had let Brittany's words define her. She had let the fear of judgment shape how she carried herself, how she walked through the halls of school, how she avoided mirrors. But standing on that stage, speaking her truth, it was like breaking chains she hadn't even realized she had been dragging behind her. Malik sat down next to her, a bottle of water in his hand. How are you feeling? Amina let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. Like I just ran a marathon. Malik grinned. Yeah, that happens. She took a sip of water, trying to process everything. Did you feel like this the first time you ever spoke out? Malik nodded, leaning back against the chair. Yeah. Scared out of my mind. He chuckled. But then I realized, fear only has as much power as you give it. Amina looked down at her hands, running her fingers over the cap of the water bottle. It's weird, she admitted. I feel like I should be scared. But I'm not. Malik tilted his head. Why do you think that is? She hesitated. Because, for the first time, I feel like I'm in control. Malik nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. That's because you are. Amina exhaled, her grip tightening around the bottle. I don't want this to just be a speech. She looked up at him. I want to actually do something. Malik grinned. That's what I like to hear. She took another sip of water, her mind already racing with possibilities. How do I make this bigger? How do I make sure kids like me don't feel the way I did? Malik leaned forward. Well, what do you wish had been there for you when you were struggling? Amina thought about it. She thought about the long, painful days of silence. About the whispers in the hallways, the fake smiles from teachers who never really intervened. About the nights she spent crying into her pillow, wondering if she would ever be accepted. And then it hit her. A support group, she said, voice stronger now. A safe space at school where people can talk. Where they know they're not alone. Malik smiled. That's a damn good start. Amina felt the weight of excitement building inside her. I could talk to the principal. Get something started for students who feel like they don't belong. Malik nodded. And I can make some calls. If you want, we can set up a partnership. Get professionals to help with resources, mentorship, even bring in speakers. Amina's stomach flipped. You do that? Malik smirked. Amina, I didn't come here just to give a speech and leave. You're onto something big. And I think you're just getting started. She felt her hands trembling, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from purpose. From the feeling that she was finally taking control of her story. She turned to Malik, determination flickering in her eyes. Then let's do it. The next morning at school, Amina walked through the hallways feeling different. For the first time in years, she wasn't keeping her head down. For the first time, she didn't shrink when she heard whispers. Because now the whispers weren't about her being weak. They were about how she had stood up and changed everything. By lunchtime, students were still buzzing about the video Malik had posted. It had exploded overnight, spreading across different platforms with millions of views. Amina couldn't even count the number of people who had stopped her in the hallway to say something. Some just smiled and nodded. Others, people who had never spoken to her before, actually told her they admired what she did. And then, there were the ones who had once ignored her suffering, now looking at her with something that almost resembled guilt. She spotted Kayla by the lockers, the same girl who had been part of Brittany's friend group, the same one who had told Brittany to apologize. Kayla hesitated before approaching. Hey, she said softly. Amina arched an eyebrow. Hey. Kayla bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. I just wanted to say I should have done something sooner. Amina didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say. I mean, Kayla continued, shifting on her feet, I always thought Brittany was just being funny, you know? I didn't realize how bad it was. Amina tilted her head. Didn't you? Kayla looked guilty. I guess I did. There it was. The truth. Amina let out a slow breath. Well, now you know. Kayla nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. And I want to be better. Amina studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. Then be better. Kayla exhaled, relieved. Thanks, Amina. And, if you ever need support with the group you're starting, let me know. Amina hadn't told anyone about that yet. She arched an eyebrow. How do you know about that? Kayla smiled a little. People are talking. The school needs it. And I think you're the right person to make it happen. Amina wasn't sure how to feel about that. But she did know one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. And neither were the kids who needed this. A week later, the Westview Safe Space Initiative was officially launched. The school approved the program after Malik personally reached out to the administration, explaining the importance of having a space for students to share their experiences. Amina was the official student leader, and for the first time in her life she felt like she had a place where she belonged. The first meeting was held in an unused classroom after school. She expected maybe 5 people to show up, at most 10. But when she walked in, the room was packed. Students filled the seats, lined the walls, even sat on the floor. Some were people she recognized, kids who had also been bullied, ignored, cast aside. Others were new faces, people who just wanted to listen and learn. Amina stood in front of them, gripping her notebook. This was her moment. She took a deep breath and spoke. My name is Amina Hassan. And for a long time I thought I was alone. The room was silent. She looked around, meeting the eyes of students who had likely felt the same pain she had carried for years. But I know now that I'm not. A few students nodded, some looking emotional already. This isn't just a meeting. This isn't just a club. This is a space where we see each other, where we listen, where we stand up for one another. The energy in the room shifted. Amina continued. If you've ever felt unheard, if you've ever felt small, this is your place too. A slow clap started from the back of the room. Then another. And soon the entire group was applauding her. Amina let out a slow, deep breath. She had spent so many years wanting to disappear. Now, she had built something that would last forever. And for the first time she felt powerful. Amina sat at the front of the classroom watching as students found seats, whispering among themselves. The first meeting of the Westview Safe Space Initiative was about to begin, and the sheer number of people who had shown up was overwhelming. She had expected maybe 10 people. There were over 30. Some were sitting in chairs, others on desks, and a few leaned against the walls. Their faces ranged from curious to nervous to hopeful. Jordan stood beside her, grinning. You see this? He whispered. This is huge. Amina swallowed, nodding. It was. But it was also terrifying. What if she messed up? What if people thought this was pointless? But then she looked out at the crowd, saw the way some students avoided eye contact, their shoulders hunched as if they were used to shrinking into the background. She knew that feeling. And she wasn't going to let them feel it here. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. Hey everyone, she said, her voice steady. Thank you for coming. The room quieted. My name is Amina Hassan. And for a long time I thought I was the only one. A few heads nodded. I thought the bullying I went through was just something I had to deal with. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I didn't push back, it would stop. She took a breath. It didn't. The silence in the room felt heavy. I know I'm not the only one who's felt that way. I know some of you in this room have had days where you didn't want to come to school. Days where you felt invisible or hated for no reason. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at her, listening intently. She swallowed. That's why I started this group. Because no one should have to feel that way. And if they do, they should at least know they're not alone. A hand raised in the back. Amina blinked. Yeah? A boy she vaguely recognized, Daniel from her history class, lowered his hand slowly. What if we don't know how to talk about it? Amina nodded. That's okay. You don't have to say anything if you're not ready. You can just be here. Daniel hesitated, then gave a small nod. Amina scanned the room. This isn't about forcing anyone to share. It's about making sure everyone here knows this is a place where they're safe, where they matter. Jordan clapped first. Then one by one, others followed. And for the first time since the bullying started, Amina felt something entirely new. She felt at home. Over the next few weeks, the Safe Space Initiative grew. Students who had never spoken before started opening up. Kids who used to eat alone now ate together. Amina watched in awe as the group became something bigger than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, she was setting up chairs for their weekly meeting when someone unexpected walked in. Kayla. Amina froze. They hadn't talked much since that day in the hallway, since Brittany had been exposed for what she was. Kayla looked hesitant. Hey. Amina crossed her arms. Hey. Kayla shifted. Can I join? Amina studied her, trying to figure out her angle. Why? Kayla took a deep breath. Because I used to be part of the problem. And I don't want to be that person anymore. Silence stretched between them. Then finally Amina nodded. Then grab a chair. Kayla smiled. Small, uncertain, but real. And Amina? For the first time in a long time, she felt like things were really changing. A month later, Malik returned to Westview High. Amina met him in the front office, where the principal had invited him to discuss the impact of his visit and the Safe Space initiative. He grinned when he saw her. "How's my favorite student activist?" Amina laughed, shaking her head. "I wouldn't go that far." "Oh, I would," Malik said, looking at the stack of student sign-ups for the club. This is leadership." Amina smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Malik handed her a small envelope. "By the way, I pulled some strings. There's a national conference on youth activism next month. You've been invited to speak." Amina's mouth fell open. "Me?" Malik nodded. "You." Amina held the envelope like it was something precious, something unreal. She had started this just wanting to survive. Now, she was changing lives, including her own. As she looked around the school, the same school where she had once felt so small, so unimportant, she realized something. She had won. Not in the way Brittany had tried to win, through cruelty and power, but in a way that mattered more than anything. She had taken control of her own story. And this was just the beginning. Amina sat on her bed that evening, holding the envelope Malik had given her. She traced her fingers over the raised seal, still unable to believe that she had been invited to speak at a national conference. For so long she had felt powerless. For so long she had been a victim of other people's cruelty. And now she had a voice that people actually wanted to hear. Her phone buzzed on her nightstand, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from Jordan. "So, what's the plan, superstar?" She smiled, shaking her head before typing back, "I have no idea." Almost immediately, another text popped up. "That's the best part." Amina let out a soft laugh, setting her phone aside. He was right. For the first time in her life, she had options. She had power over her own future. And she wasn't about to waste it. The next morning, Amina walked into school with a confidence she had never felt before. Whispers still followed her, but they weren't the same as before. These weren't whispers of judgment or mockery. They were whispers of curiosity, admiration, and maybe even a little bit of guilt. She passed by Brittany's old friend group, now fractured, distant, a shell of what they used to be. Kayla, who had once stood at Brittany's side, now walked alone. When their eyes met, Amina gave her a small nod. Kayla hesitated before offering a small, grateful smile in return. A few months ago, Amina would have avoided the moment entirely. But now she understood that change took time. Not just for her, but for everyone. Amina spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the conference. She had never written a speech before, never stood in front of a crowd that size. She stayed up late, reading through old journal entries, revisiting the pain of her past so she could find the right words to help others move forward. One evening, while sitting in the school library, she felt a presence beside her. She looked up to see Malik, hands in his pockets, a knowing smirk on his face. "How's it coming?" he asked. Amina groaned, rubbing her eyes. "Slowly. I don't even know where to start." Malik pulled up a chair. "Start with the truth." Amina sighed. "I already did that at the first Safe Space meeting. I told them how I felt, what I went through. How is this different?" Malik tilted his head. "Because this time you're not just telling your story. You're shaping how the world hears it." She blinked, processing his words. Malik leaned back. "Think about it. Right now your story is viral. People are listening. But this speech? This is your chance to tell them what they should take from it." Amina sat in silence, letting that sink in. Then, slowly she reached for her pen. She had her angle. The night of the conference, Amina stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. She had practiced her speech over and over, but now that she was minutes away from stepping on stage, the fear crept in again. What if she messed up? What if she froze? A warm hand landed on her shoulder. She turned to see Malik, his eyes calm and reassuring. "You got this," he said. Amina swallowed hard. "I hope so," he chuckled. "You already do." The announcer's voice rang through the auditorium. "And now, please welcome a young leader whose story has inspired millions. Amina Hassan." A deep breath. She stepped onto the stage. The applause was deafening. She blinked against the bright lights, scanning the sea of faces looking up at her. Then she spoke. "I spent most of my life believing that if I just stayed quiet, people would leave me alone." The room fell silent. "I thought if I made myself small, I wouldn't be a target." She gripped the edges of the podium. "But the truth is, no matter how small I tried to be, the world still found a way to make me feel like I didn't belong." A few heads nodded. She swallowed. I thought my only options were to stay silent or to disappear. But I was wrong. She let the words sink in, let herself breathe through the emotions rising in her chest. I'm standing here today because someone reminded me that my voice matters. That I matter. She took a steady breath. And I want you to know that you matter too. A ripple of emotion spread through the room. I'm not here because I won some battle against my bullies. I'm here because I won a battle against the voice in my head that told me I wasn't enough. She saw people wiping their eyes, nodding along. This isn't just about me. It's about every single person who has ever felt like they weren't wanted. Amina's voice grew stronger. They were wrong about me. She stepped away from the podium, walking toward the edge of the stage. And if you've ever felt like I did, I need you to know, they were wrong about you too. The audience stood. The applause shook the walls. Tears filled her eyes as she smiled, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the moment. She had come so far from the girl who used to shrink away in the hallways. Now she stood at the front of the room, owning every second of it. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader. After the conference, the momentum didn't stop. Amina's story continued to spread. The Safe Space initiative grew, spreading to other schools, inspiring other students to start their own chapters. A month later, she received an invitation from a major news network. They wanted to feature her story. Amina sat in the news studio, her hands folded in her lap as the interviewers smiled at her. Amina, your journey has touched so many lives. What's next for you? She exhaled, thinking about the girl she used to be. The girl who used to sit in the school bathroom, crying. The girl who used to wish she could disappear. And now she was facing the world head-on. She met the interviewer's gaze, smiling. What's next? She repeated. Making sure no one else ever feels as alone as I did. The interview aired that night, reaching millions of viewers. And in homes across the world, kids who had once felt small and invisible saw Amina Hassan. A girl who had once believed she had no power. A girl who had been bullied and broken down. A girl who had stood up and changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, they saw hope for themselves too. Years later, Westview High looked completely different. There were no more Britonists ruling the hallways. The Safe Space initiative had turned into an official part of the school, helping students who needed support. And Amina? She had gone on to do something even bigger. She became an activist, a speaker, an advocate for those who felt voiceless. She returned to her old school one last time, standing in the same hallway where she had once felt so small. Now her picture hung on the wall. A plaque beneath it read, Amina Hassan, the girl who refused to stay silent. She smiled, knowing that somewhere, some kid who felt just like she once had would see this and know. They were never alone. And they never had to be silent again.